everybody. So I wanted to sit down and do this video, my kind of evaluation of Shane English. I've been wanting to do it for a while now, but I've been kind of tied up with some visa things as I move here to Changzhou in Fujian province. It's been a little bit different. You can believe everything that people tell you about it being the south of China being different from the north of China. I find it pretty true. The atmosphere is quite different. To me, it's a little reminiscent of Florida. If you're from New York and you move to Florida, you'll find the same kind of differences. And I'm kind of finding them now. But I'm in the process of getting my residence permit smoothed out and in play and validated. So I'll let you know how that goes as we go on, getting settled in here. But now I'm finding some time to actually sit down and do this video on Shane English, which I've been promised for a while. And what I've decided to do is to kind of truncate it with sort of clips from my visit to Changzhou Museum. I figure a museum, it's in the books, it's one for the history books now, so I figured that would be a good kind of metaphor for this video. That being said, if anybody is going to Changzhou, I would highly recommend going to the Changzhou Museum as kind of a first stop, first visit, because you'll find a little bit about the history of the city. And if you're just kind of left to your own, it's hard to sort of ascertain what the history of Changzhou is. And I kind of wish now, in retrospect, that I did go to the Changzhou Museum when I first arrived in Changzhou, because yeah, I found the history pretty elusive, just kind of driving around streets and looking for historic sites. I didn't really come up with much, but when I went to the Changzhou Museum, it gave me a little more perspective on the city, and I kind of wish I had that from the get-go. But anyway, let's talk about Shane English. And now I do this video for anyone who's perhaps interested in working for Shane English in Changzhou. Now, I say Shane English in Changzhou because it is essentially separate from all the other Shane Englishes. It's a little bit like a franchise where you just kind of buy the promotional materials, or you buy the right to use their name, or but it's pretty much run independently of any sort of corporate programming or curriculum. So Shane English in Changzhou will probably be different from any other the other Shane Englishes that are in China. But once again, I do this video for anybody who's looking into working for them, and give you a little bit of my experience. Now, I don't do this to gain any influence. You know, you can either like Shane English or don't like it. You can like me or don't like me. You can like China or not like China, or you like America or not like America. I really don't care. I'm not really trying to gain any influence. I'm just kind of trying to record my experiences here for the sake of recording them. I enjoy making videos, and I enjoy keeping a record, keeping track of my thoughts and my memories. So this is what I'm going to do. So I figured I'd make this video. Okay. And what I'm going to do is kind of break it up into sections and have like kind of each heading. Each section will have a little bit of a heading, a little bit of a theme, or a topic or a certain aspect of the company that I want to discuss. And so let's get started. All right, so the first aspect I want to talk about is first impressions. All right. Now I came to Shane English. I had originally was planning to go back to work for the company I had last worked for in Nanjing, Metin English, and I had signed an agreement with them. But I had also just gotten into a house in Florida, and so I was still in the process of sorting out and settling in there and getting things straightened away with my new house. And unfortunately, I just found it a little too difficult to be walking away from it, so I had to tell Metin English, to my dismay, that I couldn't really be there at the agreed time. And I'm sorry that had to happen, but it was really too early. It was a bit too premature for me to go back to China when I was trying to sort out my new home. there in Florida, so I had to sort of cancel that. Much to my dismay, because I liked working for Menton and I liked the people I knew there. So I wasn't able to do that, and then I kind of waited 6 months and got things in order, and then started to look for another position in China. I had originally found some place in Sanya, an island in the south, deep south of China, but I was speaking to an ex-girlfriend of mine, and I was kind of hoping to rehabilitate our relationship, and she was in Nanjing, Li Xing. I've spoken to her in the other videos, about her in the other videos. And so I decided I wanted to find a place closer to Nanjing, and I found Changzhou, and I didn't really know anything about Changzhou or Shane English at that point. But I did know that it was in a pretty respectful sort of proximity to Nanjing, and I kind of felt that would be a good sort of approach to rehabilitating our relationship. It would give us a nice kind of buffering zone or comfort zone where we pretty much met each other only through consent and arrangement, not through any sort of coincidence, or I bumped into you, or so-and-so saw you, or blah, 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 you know. Didn't really want to do all that, so I kind of chose Changzhou. And I spoke with a fellow named Nick Wallenbeck, who turned out to be the director of studies at Shane English, though at that time I don't think he held that title. Young guy. We kind of hit it off, I thought. I told him what I was interested in. I told him, you know, I was kind of looking to settle in. Certainly if my relationship worked out, I was hoping to find a place I could spend a few years working at with, and perhaps promote, achieve some kind of promotions that would get me eventually out of the classroom, and maybe just working on kind of material and resources at some point. And he listened to me, and he kind of felt he kind of iterated that the company was able to provide all that, and I was kind of looking forward to getting started with the job. That being said, I wasn't a big fan of training centers. I had worked for training centers before, and I always kind of found them very sort of random and inconsistent in their programming and curriculum, and that's always kind of very hectic to me. And also they put a lot of stress on promotional and marketing aspects of their companies that I'm not keen on. So I wasn't really looking forward to working with a training company again. But once again, it was more about that proximity to Nanjing and Li Xing at that point. Now, first impressions, a couple red flags. I got on the plane and I headed to Changzhou in February of 2018. And a couple red flags just kind of immediately kind of arose when I arrived. Normally, in my experiences, when I traveled from the USA to start a new job teaching in China, you usually have somebody waiting for me at the airport, and they're usually a driver. If the city is 3, 4, even maybe about 4 hours is, I think, the longest drive I've ever had to. 4 hours is probably the longest drive that I ever had to my new city from Pudong. But usually they provide a driver. Your human resources person, the person you have been talking to, will be there to meet you, and they usually, if they don't know you by face, they will have a sign with your name, and usually they will help you with your luggage and get you to a car, and you'll head off to your school, and they'll put you in an apartment or a hotel room or something like that. Now this time I met the human resources person I had been speaking with at Shane English, and I met him at the the departure gate there, or the arrival gate. I'm sorry, and we ended up walking. We ended up not. He didn't have a car. I suppose to say he didn't have a car. We ended up taking buses and taxis and trains, and I just felt that was just a real big inconsideration, because I had been on a plane. Here I'd been on a plane for 14 hours. I had all my luggage. I was pretty tired, and I was unfamiliar with where I was going, or what kind of transportations and what kind of transit I would have to engage that quickly. So yeah, it was just very exhausting, having to lug all my luggage onto a bus and then get on a train, get on a subway, and I just kind of felt it was very inconvenient. Usually the companies show you take that into consideration when they come to pick you up. It wasn't just me either. There was some other foreign teachers that I had spoken to had that same experience, and they weren't too pleased about it either. So it's something that maybe Shane English can sort of keep in mind when they're recruiting teachers from overseas. Another red flag was when we finally got to Changzhou. The hotel they put me in was a real sleaze roach hotel. It was a real roach hotel, almost on par with that Hong Kong hotel I was in that I made a video about. It was just this dumpy, dirty, old place that usually wouldn't accept a foreigner because of you're not really supposed to be allowed to book a hotel that doesn't, because you're supposed to always register with the police wherever you go in China. A lot of hotels don't want to deal with that, so only the bigger franchise or more established franchises have sort of the system for dealing with that. A lot of little ones usually won't take you in because of that. But this one, there was a lot of haranguing and a lot of pleading, and they took me in. And they put me in there, I think, mainly because it was right across, it was in the same plaza where their main head office at that point was. Shane English has a number of schools in Changzhou, satellite schools, and when I first arrived, this was their main head office, and this hotel was right across the way. But it was just really dirty, and I was really, it was really sort of, it just raised a red flag, The one thing you have to be in China to keep in mind is to keep an open mind. You have to be open-minded. You just kind of have to say, okay, whatever it comes at you. Okay, whatever, because you never know what you're really dealing with. There's a lot of sensitivities and things, and you can't really sort of it's not really good to be complaining about those kinds of things when somebody's being generous enough to provide them for you for the most part. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't also have your, if you have experiences and standards, you shouldn't also ignore them, So for me it was a red flag, but I was keeping an open mind. I mean, it was only my first day there, so what can you do? What would you want to judge on your first day? Another thing about the company was that it was Shane English is primarily a British franchise, so you have they use the British symbolism quite a bit in their marketing and promotions, but it still fell into that same sort of dynamic that I was so uncomfortable with when I worked at Wall Street English. Wall Street English was an American company that was bought out by Pearson English, which is a British sort of educational conglomerate. And when they bought it out, they just started kind of, plastering British symbolism all over Wall Street. Wall Street is not in Britain, And that dynamic was just one that I was really uncomfortable with, because all their materials was American English, all their sort of their productions and their sort of video programming was all American, but here they were plastering all this British stuff all over it, and even in the management tried to emphasize sort of the British aspect, and I just was really uncomfortable with it, and there was some of that happening at Shane English because their programming was distinctly American. It was an American program called AL07, and they had just bought it when apparently they were just starting it out when I was working there. When I started working for them, it was something they were just starting to implement. It's a great program, because it sort of caters right to Chinese symbolism, kind of Chinese culture, takes in account a lot of the mistakes that Chinese typically make in learning in language acquisition or English language acquisition, and it uses conversations that are useful to Chinese children, and it gives them the tools to have conversations that are common and probably useful for them, you know. So it's really a great problem, but it's, you know, it's pretty distinctly American, you know. That being said, you know, Shane in English was not really out of rights to, you know, they bought it and they could do whatever they want with it, you know. They bought the licenses to it, and so they could do whatever they want with it. But I'm just always uncomfortable with them sort of promoting that British aspect, because like in Wall Street English it became a very sort of political agenda, you know. It became very sort of, you know, politically charged, and I didn't care for that environment. I was very uncomfortable in it. And I just kind of feel if I was in a managerial position or if it was under my direction, I would do my best to sort of show a much more diverse sort of symbolic representation of the English language, because you have teachers from all over the world teaching English, not just American or British. Certainly, I respect the British claims to the language, but it's an organic thing, and it's just has such diverse representation that I would want that to be a part of my you know, marketing, my promotional materials, and my symbolism, not sort of trying to make it a very distinctly nationalistic sort of perception or perspective, you know. Anyway, so that was kind of my first impressions of oh, one more. Yeah, there was one other red flag of mine that hit me really quickly, was that I found out pretty soon when I went to the head office and started meeting the teachers, I found out a lot of them were illegal. And that's kind of a big red flag, because, you know, they could all, you never know if that's what they're doing. They could always, you know, the government can always come in and close them down the next day, or even worse, you know, they'll get rid of all those legal teachers, and you'll be stuck with all their classes, which is one of the problems I have found in training centers before, is that if you're a reliable worker and you show up and you do your work and you do it well, and you're legal, you might just end up with everybody else's work at the end of the day. You know, the unreliable ones will take sick days and go on vacations and everything and you know, they're not going to have another teacher they can bring in. They can't. There's no such thing as substitute teachers. You know, you're it. So they just kind of dump it on you. With the, you know, they might pay you for the extra hours, or at least they ought to if it's extra hours. But other times they just kind of load up your schedule, because there's a few hours that they always have 4 or 5 hours they can work with, and they just kind of dump it on you, and it's just a nightmare. You know, it's just kind of like punishment for being a good employee, and you know, I'd hate that managerial sort of like, well, I gotta do what I gotta do, you know, because I had, you know. And it's not just in the English, you know, and that happens not just in this industry. You know, it happens in a lot of industries. It certainly happens to me in America. I had that same problem when I was working at the Home Depot in the United States, where, you know, the other people that are working with you aren't reliable. They don't show up to work, or they show up drunk, or they just call in sick or whatever, and the managers just kind of pats themselves on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm cutting back on labor hours. Yo, you can do it, buddy, because you're here, you know. And I don't like that managerial strategy where you know, they're always in that position to take advantage of the people who are their most reliable workers, or, you know. Anyway. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about the training period. Now, the training period for Shane, I think it kind of serves as a probationary period, as is true of most companies. There's a very strong probationary aspect to it. but it was a very long one with Shane, and they kind of take advantage of a certain clause in their contract, which states that they don't have to compensate you for any promotion or for any sort of training or promotional aspect of the job. Even though the hours they did put a lot of the training hours towards my my working hours, or in classroom hours, but they pad up the week with these training sessions, and at some points it just kind of became exploitative, where they were doing things that had nothing to do with training. They were just trying to create materials for their company. They had some teachers making videos. They had they were trying to compile together books of lesson plans and compile together ideas for presenting theoretical classes about activities and things like that. And I just felt like that has nothing to do with what I'm doing in the classroom. I thought I was appreciative of the training when it was about the classroom, because like I said, the AL 07 program for Shane English was new to them, so they were kind of working out ideas there too. So we would go and do demo classes, and as much as it was an inconvenience at time, it did give me the ability to kind of look over at games and things that I was trying to develop and see where they might not work or where they could work. The problem with that, though, was we were always working with native speakers. We were working with our colleagues, and they all had exceptional proficiencies in the language. So it didn't translate in the classroom whatsoever. Like when you got in the classroom and you were with a bunch of kids, they didn't have that proficiency level. So whatever went really quickly in your demo class with your colleagues was going to take forever with the kids. So in that aspect, it kind of was counterproductive. And like I said, they just kind of exploited it all the way to the end. They were just kind of like making us come in there and do things that they were just trying to archive, for their company. And I felt like I was creating materials and they hadn't hired me to do that. Like if you want to hire me to create materials, then you do that, but don't hire me under the auspices of teaching English and then say, you know what, you've got a talent doing this and this and this, so why don't you do all that for us too, and because of this clause in your contract, you got to do it for free. I didn't care much for that. We did a lot of shadow teaching also while they were waiting for classes to open up and to gain students, gain new clients, new customers. We did a lot of shadow teaching, so which entailed sitting in somebody else's class and watching them have a class, and then periodically you would have to get up and do a portion of the class yourself, which was kind of awkward at times, but I can't knock it too much. I mean, it makes sense to try and acclimate yourself to the class and the students as much as possible, because one of the aspects of their program that they like to sell is that the kids will gain familiarity with their teacher, and which means over a period of years they hope to have one teacher for 3 or 4 levels of the program. So the kids have that kind of rapport with one teacher, and trying to establish that early is a good idea, especially if if a teacher is leaving. The only problem is they didn't like to tell anybody that the teacher was leaving. They had even asked me not to talk about staying in China, which I thought was a bit insulting and a bit deceptive, and I couldn't really fully agree to. I wasn't going to tell a lie for the company, so I just said I was leaving. But originally I was saying, I found a job that I prefer, that I'm going to prefer, that better suits me in China. And the compensations are better, if not, are equal, if not better, So I'm going to move on. Anyway, and another aspect I want to say about this training thing is, like, during this training center period, they purged their ranks. They went through their ranks and they actually got rid of all the illegals. So there was a lot of teachers there that didn't have the visas or the teaching criteria to technically be a legal teacher in China to supposedly to gain their permits. So there was, I guess, a lot of backroom dealing going on. They got rid of all those teachers and they brought in a bunch of teachers that were qualified, and were pretty, I would say, pretty exceptional. They all seemed to exhibit the skills that you would see in a teacher that has experience, but they exploited them, they exploited them to the hilt, I felt. They really sort of pushed them out there and tried to really sell those skills to their, but they are a training center. What do you expect them to do? So yeah, and one other thing during there is they had a couple from Canada that was about my age, and I, pretty much was obviously had experience in teaching, at least the female did, and for whatever reason, the Chinese police in Changzhou felt a need to interview them. It was originally put to us that they were going to interview all of the foreign staff at Shane English, and it wasn't really specific why or what they were going to ask, And this was just before the Huawei incident. So they said apparently they had the police come and meet the Canadian couple, and they had a translator in there, and they asked them questions about like political affiliations and things like that, and which was a very sort of I would say an intimidation tactic or something like that. It really fell outside of the norm when it came to my experience, getting a work permit in China to teach English. This aspect was something new, and it really kind of reeked of an intimidation tactic of some sort. So I wanted to bring that up here. Okay, the schools themselves, like I was saying, Shane English, to me, it seemed to be the only apparent training center for children or the most prominent training center for children in Changzhou. Like I said, it had 3 or 4 satellite schools or 3 or 4 branches right in Changzhou, and it seemed to be the most prominent. Most people knew Shane English. They knew the brand in Changzhou, and they knew of they had probably the most, they probably had the largest sort of foreign staff working for them. So they had different schools, and the school I was put at was probably one of the more, it probably had one of the bigger clienteles of all the schools. We definitely had I definitely had a full schedule of classes. I had 15 students, 5 classes a day during the weekends, which was a pretty big roster, a pretty big, I had a pretty big roster of students. And, but the school that they had assigned me to, there was a school called Changzhou, and it was kind of a floor in a hotel, the first floor of a hotel in Changzhou, the Mihu Hotel. They've since built a new school for Changzhou, but my entire stay in Changzhou was working at the Changzhou school. That was considered my school, and it was just junky, man. It was just beaten up and run down. I used to say it was a place where people put things to be forgotten, And because the walls were all scuffed up and dirty, and there was holes in the walls, there was door handles missing, and clocks not on the wall, or clocks not working, and just these old ratty sort of posters and things like stickers peeling off the wall, and marks all over the floor. And it was just really kind of beat up sort of garage somewhere, like where people put things to be forgotten, basically. And they would always ask us, hey, what can we do? What do we need at the school? And we'd always tell them, and nothing would get done. I'd be like, the door handle is broken. You need a new door. No, okay. And the school manager there, all the schools had their own manager, and they were usually Chinese people. And they just kind of ignored you. She was kind of rude. The school manager that I worked for, she was just kind of rude. And that was actually my impression of a lot of the Chinese teachers. They give you have a Chinese assistant who is assigned to your classrooms, who will sit in your class every day. But you don't sit in their classes, which kind of created a lot of friction in terms of feedback. They would give you feedback, but you couldn't really give them feedback. And I just kind of got the general, they're all young females for the most part. And no, they all are young females for all of it, the whole part. And they were just kind of rude, you just kind of felt they were playing their sexuality, Certainly if you had a relationship with one of the TAs, your chances were better in creating a sort of advantage to your place in the school. It is a family-run business, so if you're in a relationship with one of the family members, you got it made for the most part. But these Chinese girls, they're I don't begrudge them for trying to better their lives and be respected as teachers, but they would undermine you sometimes in the classroom. They would just kind of take it over and yell and shout at the kids, and you'd be in the middle of trying to save time and get all your language points hit and all your vocabulary points hit, and the TA would step in and kind of stop your class for 5 minutes, and you didn't really know what to say. Sometimes you could appreciate it, but a lot of times it was just disruptive, and they didn't really feel like it was a problem. And outside of that, they were just kind of rude to me in the office. I can remember countless times I would just say something like, "Good morning, hi, how are you doing?" And they would just turn their heads and walk by. And I was like, "Where is that coming from?" It's like, what is that about? I'm just saying hello. Professional courtesy is kind of essential to any sort of workplace. And I had to go to Nick a couple of times, the director of studies, Nick Wong back there, and say, hey, I don't know what's going on there, but they're quite rude. This includes the school manager. They just don't seem to acknowledge my presence, and if there is an opportunity to congratulate me for doing some exceptional work, they go out of their way to neglect doing so. And I just felt that was just rude. It's just not professional by any means. And I went to Nick a couple of times and told him about it, especially when when the opportunity is there to recognize the work of your colleagues as being exceptional and helping everyone out, and you intentionally neglect doing so. You intentionally do that is to sort of undermine that value, and it's to constantly, it's a form of harassment. Let's face it, man. It's a form of harassment. And I went to Nick a couple of times, and he never kind of gave me a straight answer. And this is kind of where I lost respect for him on some level. He's a great organizer. He's a smart kid, but he just would not take a stand, and maybe that has something to do with his relationships with other members of the staff. His personal relationships with some of the members of the staff, but he said, I can't force them to be nice. And I was like, well, yeah, you're a manager. That's exactly what you do. You impress upon them that there's a certain professional courtesy that everyone needs, and to purposely not recognize somebody who's doing a good job or has done something that is beneficial to the company and beneficial to its beneficial to the company's recognition, and you're purposely neglecting to recognize that, your denial of doing so is harmful. It's harmful to the company. So that was the schools. I found myself navigating the Chinese girls' egos way too much than I want, way more than I wanted to, you know, and it didn't endear me to working it didn't endear me to the workplace by any means. I also felt there was a very strong sort of liberal presence, the white left, the Baizhou, you know. It seemed to want to like emulate the Obama administration sort of aspect, where Americans are just supposed to be completely over grateful for everything China did and never say anything bad, or you know, just kind of completely bowing and what do you want to say, pandering to, you know, pandering to anything that wasn't American, or pandering to anything that was you know, pandering to always neglecting to be critical of anything, and I did not respect that to any degree. It's not an environment I feel is realistic or productive. You know, if you can't be critical of things and you can't be realistic about certain perceptions, then you know, it doesn't create a productive, comfortable environment for me. And especially when they're just trying to reiterate the successes that were achieved during the Obama years. I had this problem with Wall Street English when I worked there, and it wasn't something I wanted to revisit, to be honest with you.
公元311年改为晋陵。公元589年，隋政府废晋陵郡，在常熟至常州。公元624年。
All right, another aspect of training centers that I mentioned earlier that I kind of really don't care much for is the promotional aspect, and this job is no different. It was a little bit worse because they often would tell us we were doing one thing and it'd be completely different when it came time to do it. For instance, we were originally told about we were going to do some community work. We were going to go out in the communities and work with different groups and help clean up things, parks and things like that. That's originally what was going to be put at. It wasn't really put to us as a direct promotional marketing event. But we came time to do it, it was strictly promotional. We didn't do anything that resembled what was described to us. We went out and we actually held classes in a plaza, in a kind of a mall plaza out in the streets. And unfortunately it was on Children's Day, right? And for whatever reason, they thought it'd be a good idea to be using a theme of cleaning up trash or working recycling and things like that on Children's Day. And it was just so repugnant to me that I was like playing with trash on Children's Day. You know, I'm like, why didn't you do something about Children's Day? Why weren't we doing something with children instead of, why don't we just go to, have a movie event or something like that for the kids? Something that was not so strictly, and they had us hold classes in this plaza, and then they had us go around and sign people up for this like totally bogus pledge to help the environment or something like that. It was just ridiculous. And that put a really bad taste in my mouth, that promotional event. And then they followed it up with another promotional event where it was told us we were going to do like a treasure hunt. It sounded fun. We were going to go around town and find things, and each team would have to find something in a certain place, and then we'd all come back and meet up. But it wasn't that at all. It was like a marathon. It was where we wore shirts and we all stuck together and we walked 15 kilometers around all Changzhou, basically kind of holding a flag and saying, look at us, But it was also a race, and like none of us, because it was put to us as a treasure hunt, only the people who knew exactly what it really was came in their training shorts and their sneakers and their jogging, and their jogging suits and comfortable clothing. I showed up in sandals and Tevas and army pants, and I wasn't really I didn't have the advantage that the others did have. in running a marathon, basically, you know. I did pretty well. I came in third in Tibas, but the guys who beat me were, you know, they had the heads up on it, they had their sneakers and everything, so I was kind of upset about that, being thrown into that position of sort of, which is, you know, very physically demanding sort of challenge, you know, to be just kind of hurled in all of a sudden when you're going there thinking, oh, it's going to be a nice relaxing day, kind of fun day, you know. Instead it was like, you know, it was like hustling for 15 kilometers, you know. I can't stand that promotional. Other times I can understand where they're coming from, like, you know, when a public school decides to hold its classes on a weekend, then Shane needs to change their schedules. And you know, one time they had us go stand out in front of a school and just kind of say hello to kids and try and get people to sign up. I didn't have so much problem with that one. I understood they were just trying to like get the most value out of us, but you know, on top of, they're just so reluctant to give us anything, you know. They're always trying to like milk us for whatever they could, and that gets to be a bit tedious after a while, if not ingratiating, you know.
对子系阶段，塌黄的发展经历了。
All right, the system that Shane goes by. The system is where they have this AL program, and the foreign teacher does one half of it, and then the Chinese teacher does the other half, or vice versa, or they flip-flop it. And I don't think it's a system that really works, because the way the AL7 program is set up, it's kind of a smooth transition. And if you're breaking it, they kind of break it into two sections. And they try and cram so much into the foreign teachers section that it doesn't, I don't think it's a very effective approach. Essentially, you should have one block for review, one block for new language, but they try and cram in review and new language, and then just new language with whoever's doing the second block, you know. Doesn't quite work. I don't think they need it to be so aggressive about that. I think it would be better to like really solidly look at what was taught in the last lesson in the review block, and then take a look at what's going to come in the new block, and that gives you kind of like a full block between the end. It gives you kind of a full block with the review and the introduction. But the biggest problem I found with their system is that they stress so much on games, you know. They stress so much on like getting the kids out of the chairs. And I don't think that was effective. You're essentially just kind of a play pal for the kids, you know. And, you know, I can understand the people who say, oh, these poor kids, they study enough, you know. Well, yeah, but like then put them in a gym class, put them on a sports team, you know. But don't try and milk both. You know, don't try and put them on a soccer team and teach them English at the same time, you know? You just don't do that. And what I hated about it too is then they would come back, the same management team, the Chinese teachers would come back with feedback like, oh, he's more like a gym teacher. I'm like, you goddamn told me to teach these kids games, you know? I'm getting praise for my games, you know? But then you're saying I'm not a good English teacher. It's because you don't want me to be a good English teacher, you know? You want me to entertain these kids. You want me to have them up and running around, you know? You in our training sessions, you're like, stir, 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 get them out of their chairs. And I don't really think that's part of teaching English whatsoever, you know? You don't do it in the public schools. And so I don't agree. I didn't agree with that system at all, and I didn't agree with the sort of tag team aspect of it either with the Chinese teachers, you know, because there's a little bit of tension between like who is a real teacher and who is not a teacher, you know, or who has the most authority in the classroom. Does the Chinese teacher, just because they speak Chinese and are in contact with the parents all the time? Or does the foreign teacher, who is the expert on the language, who's supposed to be teaching the language, are they the expert? I just kind of felt like their system wasn't really working for me, and it caused a lot of stress and a lot of tension that I don't like to see in a program. Especially the AL07 program, because it's so well constructed, you know, it's just not being utilized very well, I thought. They also had this very sort of unrealistic thing they did where at the end of every level you had to give a presentation to the parents. So the parents would come in, and then you would have a class with the kids while the parents watched. And it was just kind of silly, you know. It was just more stress. I think it's a good idea in the sense that it holds the teacher accountable for the classroom. At the same time, you always found that the kids would go into their behavior, which, you know, they'd be behaving for their parents, and you would just kind of be playing off of that for the most part. So I didn't feel it was a very realistic presentation. It did give the parents a chance to see what their kids were doing in the classroom and what you had planned for them. That's about it, you know. And you know, I always felt guilty in that aspect because it was so game based, you know. And I was like, yeah, I'm playing games with your kids, you know. Here's the game we're playing, you know. And I'm trying to get them to speak as much as I can, but you know, how do you do that and explain to kid instructions and rules for a game at the same time in 5 minutes that you've given me to, you know, you're giving me 5 minutes or 5 or 10 minutes, you know, I think max 15 minutes to present new vocabulary or a new language point, present it, you know, and you want me to introduce a game based on that or some sort of activity, which you have to explain all that. You can't, like 15 minutes is not enough to people who don't know how to speak the language, you know. Even if the people know how to speak the language, you know, you could still, I mean, even when were working with our colleagues, it still took a lot of explanation just to get a game sort of up and running, you know, and it was just unrealistic on that aspect. I also felt, you know, a lot of the FTs became the ones that like had been at Shane English and found success there or found their lives comfortable working there. It's the only teachers there, the longest, you know, I think like 2 years was the longest anybody had been with the company, and suddenly they were senior teachers. But they became very defensive about it, and I think this is a position that Nick eventually, I found that he was also compromised by. Is that they had found success in their lives and they had found lifestyles that they enjoyed, and so they were willing to be more defensive about their positions than someone who perhaps has something to go back to or something else outside of teaching English or has success elsewhere. They're very defensive of creating, you know, the only success you can have is success with our company, you know, like that was the perception. They didn't really want to accept that you could be successful somewhere else and go back to that success, you know, that you were in a position to do that. That was something they always kind of try to undermine, you know, like this guy's an expert at what he does elsewhere. And it's not about like trying to get him to stay with us. It's more about like trying to learn what he knows and make more success for me, you know. So I didn't really sort of enjoy that aspect of it either. My conclusion. All right, just kind of wrap it up now, I guess. The program, I feel, in looking back, it should be focused more on English language points and than on facilitating games. You know, that's my one big sort of complaint about Shane English, is that it should really be about teaching English, and you shouldn't be afraid of keeping the kids in their chairs. That kind of discipline, because once they get out of their chairs, man, they just want to stay out of their chairs, and you know, it's just annoying to have somebody say, yeah, do a ball game, you and you give them a ball and they just start throwing it, or they don't even know how to catch a ball for the most part. And once the ball falls on the ground, it just becomes everybody running and grab the ball. And at the same point, you're like, no, this is supposed to be a game where you're speaking English but I need 5 minutes to get them just to get the ball back to me, so we can start the game over, so I can reset, So I don't think it should be about that. I think it should be more about language, and if it means having them sit in the chairs and just watch something and just doing it on a board, then so be it, But we're there to teach English, not to, play soccer and use English. It did seem to reinforce the white monkey aspect of it, because it just kind of devalued English usage. One of the big things that I need to talk about here is there's a clause in your contract with Shane that says you're not allowed to speak Chinese. You're not supposed to use it in the offices, speaking to your colleagues, speaking to the Chinese teachers. You're not supposed to be speaking Chinese, but you found that every teacher that had found success at Shane was, well, with the exception maybe one or two, but all the male teachers were finding an exception with the Chinese girls by speaking Chinese, and it was all about that. And the Chinese girls were basically embracing that, and showed favoritism towards those teachers because it gave them an easy path. It made things easier for them. They didn't want to have to speak English. They didn't want to have to speak English if they didn't have to, and it seemed like more of a success for them to have the male speaking Chinese than having the female speaking English, essentially. And so it was a bit of a hen's nest. It was a bit of a hen house in that aspect. It's profit driven. It's too demanding and it's profit driven. And this is a problem I found they had with the customers, I think, too. They're so profit driven that it was their schedule, and if your customer couldn't meet your schedule, the customer just loses, If they had to rerun, it wasn't that I applaud places like Wall Street because it was completely voluntary for the customer. They could arrange their classes based on their schedules. Whereas Shane English, it was their Shane English schedule or no schedule at all. There was no way for the customers to say, can I have a class can we do it Wednesday, or can I have some time on Saturday? So during vacation, Shane would set up all their classes, and the customers would get angry because they wanted to go on vacation with their kids, Kids are out of school and they want to, maybe go traveling with them or spend time with them. But Shane English was saying, no, we have our classes and you can't miss them, And all I can think is that was geared so they can get you on to the next level. If they get you to the next level, then you got to pay for another level, So it was all about rushing you through your 24, mandated classes, and you have no way out. And so I didn't really think that was a good strategy. It wasn't really sort of considerate of anybody but Shane English, and their profits. So maybe something they can take a look at if they can sort of devise a schedule that's a little more sort of receptive to the needs of their customers. I think it would be appreciated. Even though it might cause them a bit of inconvenience with, teachers scheduling faculty, but I think that would be a direction that would be helpful for both parties. I'm glad I left when I did, because when I left, they suddenly had added on office hours. They had decided to get rid of all the training mostly and just go into office hours, which meant that you would be in your school from 9 to 5 every day and on call for anything they could come up with. If a kid wanted to come in and read in the library, you had to do that. If they wanted to do an online training session, you had to do that, and that was all outside of your contract. This was not stuff you're getting paid for. And once again, It's just like they were abusing that clause in your contract that said that you're obligated to do that without compensation. Yeah, I think that's insane. Like when they, like creating those videos, and now they want to do online training as part of your contract. I don't think that's fair with the compensations they're giving. That being said, I didn't like how they thwarted good ideas. I hated how they undermined my specialties. If I was good at making PPTs, they would go out of their way, it seemed like, to avoid letting me sort of take advantage of that. Or they wouldn't give me any praise for it. They wouldn't recognize it. They might do something. They might give me a venue like for the Shane Stars. We did a drama club during the summer, where I made this great sort of PPT background for our production, and it really kind of enhanced it and gave it made it feel like a much bigger experience, and it really kind of helped the kids out too, because it gave them all the cues they needed, and so it's really successful, and the next thing I know, I'm doing the same thing for a major production in the biggest theater in Changzhou, And that being said, they still didn't pat me on the shoulder for that. No one ever kind of recognized it. They said it was obvious that they saw something in it and they wanted to exploit it, but they never wanted to give me credit for it. They never wanted to distinctly say, this guy did this, and put that as the part of their promotions. They did everything in their power not to use me as promotional too. If I had a very good presentation with the parents, they would never take photos of it, and I had the same problem with Wall Street English, I would do a really good job, and there'd be no promotion, there'd be no photos, nothing, and one of the other teachers would do probably a good job. I don't know how good it was, but there'd be all these photos, and oh my God, there were all these loving sort of sayings about the teacher and how well they did, and they'd put that on their WeChat and put it on their QQ and all their promotional materials. Like, wow, what a fun time this was! What a great time it was, But whenever I did something like that, nothing. It was just quiet. It was such an obvious absence, I can count on my hand the amount of time, I can count on my hand how many times I actually appeared in promotional materials for the school, even when my recognition was well deserved. That's what's so frustrating about it, is when you're obviously doing something that is recognizably being considered, like that PPT the backdrop I did for that play was probably one of the main motivators for a lot of this celebration thing in the theater, and they never gave me credit for it. I also, my Halloween costume was considered the best, amongst the foreign teachers. They recognized it, but the Chinese teachers did nothing. They didn't even take a photo of me in my costume. Whereas the foreign teachers thought I did Zorro, right? And it was a really well done costume, They took photos of me. They actually gave me a monetary prize for having the best costume. Chinese teachers did nothing, not even a photo, It was just so rude. It was just so uncalled for. Another aspect, it was the dance. We had to do a dance show, and I was definitely one of the best dancers, No, they had to go out of the way to say somebody else was the best dancer. They didn't even want to recognize that I was there, Anyway. What else I want to say? Oh, I guess the last thing I wanted to point out was the internet. One of the reasons I didn't like to work in the office is there's no materials there. Like most people I know keep all their materials in their home. They keep their computers at home, and I didn't want to be one of those persons dragging my computer into school. and ruining it, you know, just bringing it back and forth and through the rain and the snow sometimes, you know, just to get to class so I could use it for 9 to 10 and then drag it all the way back home, you know. But they wanted to kind of put you in that position where you were bringing in all your stuff and leaving it in the class and in the offices, either. And there's no materials in the offices, you know. So it's like, and when I did get there, like everything was like terrible. Like the internet was always terrible, my phone was always terrible, and it was just like they put that in my face too, you know. Like they had the people that they loved and that they favored, and they would always make a point to say like, wow, his internet's really fast, and look at all these phones, everything's working really great for him, and my stuff would be working like molasses, man. I can not tell you that my stuff was like not working at the speed that I'm used to. It was just like being constantly retarded, you know, and just like, let's make this as hard as we can for this guy to get ahead of the people we want to win, you know. And I guess found myself dealing with that constantly, and I didn't, yeah, you know, I don't need to put up with that. I can, like I said, I have success elsewhere. But to deal with that kind of petty sort of competitive aspects, you know, I don't do it to other people. I don't expect to be done to me. I'm not out there retarding your machines. I'm not out there trying to pull tricks or cons on you. If that's what you need, then you're obviously not mature enough to be in this competition. And anyway, so yeah, that's about it. Good things I can say is that they're reliable in terms of pay. You know, Nick did his best to make sure that we were all paid. Unfortunately, at the end of my contract, they set a precedent that said, we don't trust you. After I had spent a whole year working there and had never taken a sick day, never taken a vacation day until the very end. And when it came down to it, I was scheduled to leave on a certain day. And because of the arrangement they had made with my landlord, well, Shane pays for your housing, right? So the contract they sign is between them and the landlord. It's not between you and the landlord. But I have to check out of my apartment, right? So Shane was saying that they wanted their deposit back from the apartment, so they had to make sure that I checked out with the landlord before I left. Well, here's what happened. Okay, so Shane has the contract with the landlord, right? So basically my hands are clean of it, you know. But the landlord has to check out the apartment before he gives Shane their deposit back, right? So I'm saying, okay, let's set up that date up for this date before I leave, you know, because or the day I do leave, let's set that date up so you get your deposit back and then you can pay me. Well, suddenly the landlord says he can't make it that day. And Shane says, well, we're not going to pay you until after you've gone, you know. And I'm like, no way, that doesn't, you're not going to pay me after I leave. That's not fair, because the landlord could always go in there and say, oh yeah, he stole the TV, he stole this, you know, and now I'm not giving you your deposit back, so you can take that out of his salary and he'll have no recourse, you know. So I'm like, that's not a good deal. I don't trust you guys on that. And I don't trust the landlord on that, you know. And so they said, all right, then we'll change it. So they finagled things around. Eventually, my last weekend of classes, the landlord was able to come that Sunday, and he came and we checked everything out, and then they were like saying, oh, we weren't gonna. And then, yeah, he came and he checked everything out, he gave them their deposit back, and then they were like, they didn't give me my pay, you know, my last pay. I was like, well, are you going to give me my pay? Well, possibly maybe by the end of the day. They never gave me a definitive answer, and what they were waiting for me was for me to finish all my classes, you know. They were waiting for me to, they didn't trust to give me my money until I had completed all of my classes for them, you know. And really it was about them paying me. They had kind of flipped the tables, you know what I'm saying? to say that, oh, it's really about us. It's really that you're not the trustworthy character. You're the one trying to pull a fast one on us. You know, you're gonna, you know, even though it's your last day of classes, you know, and I had like 3 classes left. They didn't want to pay me. Like I see the human resources guy the same time that I saw the landlord, you know, but they wanted to wait until everything was over and then they paid me. And I just thought they were leaving me hanging because it was a Sunday. It was a Sunday evening. My last day of classes was Sunday, and I wasn't sure I was going to get paid, you know. And they had said prior, I was leaving Tuesday morning, and Monday they said they couldn't pay me because the accounting person wasn't in the office. I was like, who cares? Well, she should arrange something then, you know, because that's her day off. Well, she can arrange something where I get paid, because I'm not going to wait till I leave. You're not going to wait till I leave and pay me after I leave, you know. That's not going to happen, you know. And they were so reluctant to do it, though, you know. So I was like, they could tell I was on edge, you know, and they knew the only leverage I had really was to say I'm not going to show up for classes, you know, until you give me some kind of definitive answer that you're going to pay me at this point. And they never would give me the definitive answer, you know. I was like, well, then tell me you're going to pay me this, you know, Sunday night. And they wouldn't do it. They're like, yeah, you should get it soon, or we should be there soon. We're going to pay you. We just don't know when, you know. Even after they had all their deposit in it and all that was settled, you know. It just left on such a bad note, and Nick was just kind of defending it to the end. And I just kind of was disgusted with him at that point, seeing that I had been a reliable worker. I had never had any absences, and this is the way they were going to treat me at the end. I just felt like you guys are a bunch of children, man. You're a bunch of boys and girls just kind of playing do. That's all you are, you know. If you want to be that, I can show you a place where you can do that. It's called Las fucking Vegas, man. Go have fun, kids. But don't bring that in the educational system, please. Anyway. It was just really immature. It was just really unprofessional not to give somebody, a respected employee, that sort of respect they deserved in the end. But what can you say? It was a bit like the John McCain maneuver on healthcare, I suppose, where they decide personal over principle. Anyway, so that's Shane English. Anybody out there listening, if you're thinking of work for Shane English, I wouldn't deter you from doing it. You know, they could be one of the better companies in Changzhou. I can't really say for sure, but they certainly have climbed up. I watched them go from one aspect, like a lot of the companies I've worked for before, I've engaged before. They've gone from here. You know, I seem to be a pretty decent stepping stone for a lot of companies because, you know, they built new offices, and this was another aspect. They built a whole new Changzhou school, and they kind of made it like a penalty towards me. Like it was ready in like December. Or they pretty much completed building the place in December or late November into it, based on if I was going to sign a contract. I was going to sign on for another year. When they found out I wasn't going to sign another year, they waited to move into the new building until my last week. So last week I worked in this new school with all the new fixtures and everything. That was supposed to be an exciting point, or like, oh man, look at what you're leaving, you know. I don't know, but it didn't really matter at that point, you know. I could care less. It was more systematic. I was having more systematic problems with their system than more than anything. And the compensations I was receiving, so that's why I pretty much left. So anyway, hope this video finds you. If you're looking to work for them, don't let it deter you. Once again, some good people you work with there, some people who know their stuff, and some people don't know their stuff, and some people are trying to figure it out. Mostly people trying to figure it out, though. All right. We'll talk to you next time. Maybe I'll have a little bit more to share with you about my new job. Check it out. So stay tuned, stay cool, and we'll catch you next time.